talking about pillowcases. A fairly simple project, but there's a lot of people that are new to sewing who've kind of gotten into sewing since the whole mask making craze. And this might be something new to you, it might be something familiar. But we're also going to be showing you two different methods. One is just your standard line everything up, sew it, fold it in half. And then we're also going to be showing you the second, which we call, around here, we call it the hot dog method, where you're rolling things up inside. I guess down south they call it the burrito method. But that one is going to give you more of a enclosed French seam on the inside, so it finishes a little bit nicer. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is just your fabric choices. I can hold it up. So typically when we started making pillowcases, we always chose three fabrics. You had your main body, you had your flange, your decorative flange, and then you had your cuff. And they were three different fabrics. And you can still do that. Typically it was 3/4 of a yard, 3/4 of a yard for your body, 1/3 of a yard for your cuff, and then 1/8 of a yard for your flange. What we find is a lot of the really cute fabrics for pillowcases are directional. And if you don't want your design going sideways on the bed, you have to buy extra yardage. So we've kind of modified how we do things so that our pillowcase body and our cuff are the same fabric, and it's just a better use of the fabric. Okay, so I'm going to go through with some different bolts and explain how that is. So this fabric here is non-directional, okay? So it doesn't have an up or down, a left or right. Our little penguins are twisting in all directions. So if you have a fabric that's non-directional or just an all-over print, you don't have to do any different in your folding when you cut it, okay? So you're just gonna cut 1 yard and 1/8, okay? So what that does is it gives you the ability, if this is directional, to be able to turn your fabric and cut it the other way. So on the old method, you had 3/4 of a yard for your body, and you had 1/3 of a yard for your cuff, which is a total of 39 inches. With this, cutting 1 yard and 1/8, you're going to get 41 inches. So just with that little 1.5 inches extra, you're going to be able to turn things so that they aren't laying sideways on your bed. So with this one, I would cut my 1 yard and 1/8, okay? I'm not going to have to switch anything, and I'm going to grab a piece that I've already cut off. So when I go to cut this, I can cut an 11-inch piece for my cuff and a 27-inch piece for my body, right from the yardage the way it came off the bolt, okay? One thing I want you to do before you start cutting is you need to make sure to straighten your fabric. So if you've ever had it where you cut and when you open up your strip there's a little dip or a V wherever the fold was, that's because the fabric wasn't straight when you first started cutting it. Anytime you're taking something off the bolt, one, it isn't necessarily cut perfectly straight at the quilt shop, and B, when they wrap it, it goes through a huge machine at a unbelievable speed, so there's no guarantee that that fabric is perfectly straight as it goes onto that bolt. So the one thing you want to do is when you get a piece of fabric, first thing you want to do is open it up, okay? And then I'm going to match my selvage edges, because we know the selvage is straight. That's manufactured straight. We don't know if the cut sides are straight. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to match my edges, and then I'm going to hold it up, and can you see how there's a ripple in it? So now I'm going to shift it. Sorry.
It's okay.
I just got to grab it better. I'm going to shift this fabric left and right until it hangs perfectly straight. Okay? And then I'm going to lay it down, and you can see, I don't know if you can tilt it, Elaine, that now that my fabric is straight, I was off, my twist was off by about 3/4, almost a full inch. Okay, so I want to straighten these edges out before I start cutting my pillowcase. Okay. The other tip you want to do is when you start cutting, have the fold towards you Okay, so I'm going to line up this fold on a line, and I need to kind of flip it back here to see where my shortest edge is. So if I look here, I'm going to cut on this 51-inch line so that I make sure to cut off this extra. Okay, so there I've cut off that difference, and now I know my edge is straight, and I need to do the same thing on the other side. So again, I'm going to find my 12-inch mark here is as short as I can go to get my fabric even.
And when she said 12-inch, she's meaning the line on the mat?
Right.
She's lined up.
So I looked here to say that my closest full inch line, my fabric is just beyond this line, and on the mat it happens to be 12 inches. That's where I laid it down. It really doesn't matter what line you're on, you just want to find one that's going to give you the straightest cut. So I'm going to trim this off. The reason you want to have the fold towards you is, again, if you're going to get a buckle halfway through the middle of that strip, it's going to be at the fold. So if I have my ruler here and I start cutting at the fold, even if as I'm cutting my ruler twists a little bit, it's going to be twisting at the end of my strips. If I have my fabric the other way and my fold is on this end, I'm starting out nice and straight, and as I'm going, my ruler is going to be twisting, and now I can get that same little concave or convex at the middle of my strip. Okay, so try to, and again, this is not just for pillowcases, for any time you're cutting, your fabric is folded, A, straighten it, and then B, try to have the fold towards you when you cut. Okay, make sense? All right, so now for my pillowcase, and that 41.5 inches gives me a little bit of leeway to straighten my fabric out. So I'm going to move it so that I'm lined up with my 10 on my mat. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is cut the body of my pillowcase. So it's going to be 27 inches. I'm starting at my 10, so I'm going to cut at my 37. Okay, so this is going to be the body of my pillowcase. And then I'm going to cut 11 inches for my cuff. Now, that would be at the 48. I have 49 inches here. If you just want to leave it, that extra inch on there, it's really not going to matter. Again, we're making pillowcases, so you got some flexibility here. If you have a king size pillow, you might want to cut the body of your pillowcase an inch or two bigger and leave the cuff an inch or two smaller. Again, that's all flexibility that are, you can figure out yourself at home. If you only have a yard of fabric, not a yard and an eighth, you can do a 27-inch body and a 9-inch cuff. It's going to make your cuff a little bit smaller, but it works best for the non-directional fabrics. If you have that directional fabric, we're going to want to turn our fabric in a different way, and then you won't have enough. Okay, so I'm just going to trim this one off to my 11 inches. Okay, so here's my cuff, here's my body, and then for the little flange, you cut a 3-inch piece of your coordinating fabric. So I picked this little red and white stripe because my little penguins had little red and white striped scarves on them. Okay, so we'll be assembling this in a minute. I want to talk a little bit about the directional fabrics. So again, with my Grinch pillowcase that we had here, he's really cute because he'd be laying on the bed and the Grinch is going upside down. If I don't turn the fabric when I cut it, my Grinch is going to be laying on the bed and he's going to be going sideways, and your cuff is going to be over here. Okay. And this was, so when my Grinch fabric, when I was rolling it out, he's going left and right, not up and down, and that's going to be in the wrong direction. Okay. So this is another little one where my animals are going left and right, and I need them to go up and down. So I'm going to cut my yard and an eighth off of here, which I've already done. Okay. And I'm going to open it up. And before I start cutting, again, I want to make sure it's straight. So when I go to line up all these edges, they're not wobbly all over the place. So my salvages are together. I'm going to scoot it back and forth until it's hanging straight. Lay it down. And this one is pretty good. I'm only going to skim off maybe a ½ an inch or so here. So this one was wound much better. All right. So now my animals are still going left and right. I need them to go up and down, okay? So what I need to do is I'm going to open this fabric, and instead of folding it with my salvages together top to bottom, I'm going to fold it in half this way, okay? So I'm just turning it so that fold that used to be at the top and I had 2 salvages at the bottom, that fold is now running down the middle of my fabric, and both of my sides have the salvages on it. Okay, so now when I lay it down, now my animals are running north and south instead of east and west, which is the way it's going to lay on your bed. My cuff is going to be added to my side. Okay, so again, all you have to do is open that fabric. I went from, this is how it comes off the bolt, right, where my salvages are meeting at the bottom and my folds on the top. I'm going to open it up, and I'm just going to fold it the other way. So now my salvages meet on the side, and that original crease is running down the middle of my fabric. So this is where buying that 1 1/8 is now giving me the 40 inches that I need to cut my pillowcase in the other direction. Okay. So once I get it straightened out, I'm going to lay it down. Again, I have my fold facing me. And this time I'm going to lay it so that my salvage is just beyond my 10 line on my mat. So I can cut that salvage off first. And then I'm going to cut my 27-inch piece, which 10 plus 27 is 37. And then I'm going to cut my 11-inch piece, which is at the 48. So I still got both of my cuff and my body out of the same piece, and this is all the extra that I have. Okay. And with this one, I picked this little pink to be my flange. So now that we have our fabrics cut, we're going to talk about the 2 different ways of constructing the pillowcase. So the first method is you're going to take your 3-inch flange and you're going to iron it in half so that both of your raw edges are on the same side. And you're going to take your cuff and you would iron it in half. Okay. So both of my pieces are ironed in half. Then I'm going to take the body of my pillowcase.
You're working over there? Okay.
And I'm going to lay it out with the right side up. The next thing I'm going to do is lay my flange piece with all of my raw edges matching. And this one's a little bit longer. In my instructions, I tell you to cut them all to 40 inches. You can do that if that's easier. I tend to find that I don't need to cut them. I'll trim them off later after I have it sewn, after I have this edge sewn. But if it's easier for you to have them all be at the same with just cut them all down to 40 inches in length. And then I'm going to take my cuff and I'm going to lay it on top, match it up with my body of my pillow so that all of my raw edges, and I'm going to flip this over, so I need all of my raw edges, can we still see it?
Yep.
To be lined up. So there's actually going to be 5 different pieces of fabric all lined up on this edge. Okay? And then I need to put quite a few pins in there because I don't want this to shift as I'm sewing. Okay, so I'm going to flip it back. And for now, I'm going to put my pins in sideways, kind of pretending like I'm sewing it. So I'm just going to sew that 1/4 inch seam all the way along all of these edges, or this entire edge through all 5 pieces of fabric. You definitely want to use a walking foot. If you don't have your walking foot on, it's gonna, all those middle pieces are gonna shift all over the place. Whoops, Penny just crashed over in the corner. So if this was my sewing line, I sewed my 1/4 inch seam here. Once I'm done sewing, I'm going to open this up. And I like to iron it so my flange is going towards the body of the pillowcase. Okay? And at this point, if anything is uneven on my sides, I'm going to come back and trim those off now. Okay, so I would trim any of these edges even at this point. Okay? Then, once this is sewn and ironed, I'm going to flip it in half this way. And there's a different one coming that's actually sewn that'll be a little bit easier for you to see. Okay, I have to flip it right sides together. And then I need to sew this edge and my bottom edge. So I'm just going to sew across the bottom and up the side. And that'll give you your finished pillowcase. Turn it right side out and it'll be finished. Okay, so I'm going to show you the actual finished edge on the next sample that I'm doing. Okay, so I'm going to take this apart. So this is the standard way of doing it, where your cuff and your flange are all ironed and you have all raw edges on the inside of your pillowcase. If you want to do the hot dog method, okay, we're working with the same pieces. Your little flange is still going to be ironed in half, but the cuff is not going to be ironed in half. Okay, so you're going to leave this one open and you're going to place it on the table right side up. And if you think of this as your bun, the bun of your hot dog, okay, then you're going to take and you're going to lay your flange in there. So you're going to have your 2 raw edges up against one of your raw edges. Okay, so this is my bun. This is going to be my relish or my ketchup or whatever you want to think of it as, right? So I've taken my bun and I've put in my condiment on the edge of my bun. This is going to be my hot dog. And this one, I'm going to keep it open. And I'm going to put it right sides together. So my cuff was right side up. My body of my pillowcase is going to be right side down. And I'm going to match this edge up with that same raw edge. So now I have 4 layers here. I have 1 layer of my cuff, 2 layers of my flange, and 1 layer of my body. Now I'm going to take this edge and I'm going to start rolling it up. So this is creating my hot dog. Okay? And I'm going to roll it up until I can see the other side of my cuff, my bun. Okay, so once I got my hot dog in the middle, I'm going to take this edge of my bun and I'm going to fold it over the hot dog. And again, match it up with this raw edge. Okay, so again, I still have 5 layers. They're just in a different order. This cuff is going around the hot dog that's in the middle. Okay, So again, I would pin this several times, and then I'm going to go sew a 1/4 inch seam along this whole edge. And again, you definitely want to use your walking foot.
What'd you lose?
Oh, no. A sample. That's my hot dog. All right, I lost my sample. Where'd it go?
Okay. It has to be here. Oh, here it is.
Okay. Sorry. All right. So, and if you don't have a serger, if you have a serger, serging these edges is going to give you the best finish, okay? It's going to kind of wrap that edge. If you don't have a serger, what you want to do, and I'm going to have Elaine tilt down, is I want to start by stitching a 1/4 inch seam in, and I'm going to do that the whole length, and that's going to stabilize it. And then I'm going to switch over to a zigzag stitch, and I want to have it be that zigzag stitch, if you need to, adjust your width on it so that when the needle comes down, it's right off the edge of where all of these seams meet, and then it goes over and it lands just before that 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so you're just zigzagging, so it's kind of wrapping around this unfinished edge and then going up. You don't want it to bite over past that 1/4 inch line. So you want it to land, just kind of set up your zigzag stitch so that it's hitting, when it goes over to the right, it's just off the edge of those seams, and then when it goes to the left, it's landing just before that 1/4 inch line. Okay, so here's my finished edge. And I got my hot dog inside, and now I just need to pull my hot dog out. All right. So again, here was my hot dog I had rolled up. Here is my cuff that is now folded in half. My flange I'm going to iron typically towards the body of my pillowcase. And you can see on this side, I have a finished edge. Okay. So that seam that I sewed and serged is on the inside of my cuff. Okay. So again, once I would take this, I would iron this well. Okay. And on this one I still had my salvages, so I'm going to come back now and I'm going to trim my salvages off and trim off any difference in what my flange and my cuff are. Again, if you cut them all at that 40 inches in the beginning, you usually can skip this step. But you know, to me, it's just a time management thing. I tend to do it afterwards. All right. So there's my pillowcase. And now again, I need to flip it in half. And what I want to do is really focus on matching up where this little flange meets on the side. So I'm going to match it up there, because that's what people notice if they look at that side, whether or not that flange is kind of matched up. Okay. I'm going to pin it to make sure it stays in place. And then I match up the end of my cuff. Oops. So when I start sewing, I want to make sure that this isn't going to shift. So usually what I do is I'll get this straightened off, and you can see on the bottom here, there's a little bit of a discrepancy. I can come and trim that off later. This is what I really want to focus on. So when I sew my edges, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my needle down. So I'm going to put it into my machine going this way. I put my needle down maybe an inch past where that flange is, and I sew off the end of my cuff this way. That's going to really stabilize that. Then I take it out of the machine. I flip it over. I put my needle down again about a half an inch on top of where that first stitching was. And then I'm going to sew down the rest of the long line of my pillowcase. Okay? So that's really focusing on getting this stabilized and in the spot I want it. Then I'm going to come and sew down here. And now at this point, if I have a little bit of difference, I can trim that or square it off. And then again, I'm going to come back and I'm going to stitch along that bottom edge. I'm going to go back if I don't have a serger. I'm going to stitch that 1/4 inch line, and then I'm going to come back with that same zigzag stitch that I did, that I showed you underneath our cuff here. Okay, once that's done, I'm going to turn my pillowcase right side out. We'll just put a couple pins so it tendons together. So once I turn this right side out, again, where this little flange meets up, and when I pinned it just now, it wasn't real good, but you notice how if it's not nice and straight, that's very noticeable. So if you make sure to pin and sew that down first, it'll just look much nicer as a finished edge. Okay, kind of like on this little guy here. So again, we got that flange nice and straight when we sewed it down. And then one other thing that I want to show you is this was a fabric we had from last Christmas. We don't have it anymore. But the stripes are really fun to play with because they usually come off the bolt in this direction. So if I take my little coffee one here, because who wouldn't want to wake up on a coffee pillowcase, right?
The perfect college pillowcase.
Yeah, yeah.
If they get to go to college.
Okay. Yeah, right. So if I cut off my 11-inch cuff, and then I cut off my 27-inch body, okay, so there would be a seam right here. Then I might take something kind of fun like this as my little flange, a little polka dot. So I would lay that flange, once this is opened, along that edge. But because this was cut off of this piece, and basically it's just going to be put right back on top of it, you get your stripe that's totally matched up. Get it going in the right direction for you guys. So all of my stripes are matched up because this had just been one seam cut and we inserted the flange into it. So it looks like you really did a lot of work and really was just one cut. Okay, so play around with your stripe fabrics. This was one where we only had a yard, so my cuff is a little bit shorter. Doesn't matter as long as it fits your pillow. Again, on this one, this was doing the standard 27-inch. This cuff we left a little bit longer, but actually these fat pillows, they get, you know, my flange is actually starting before my pillow ends. So if you have the bigger pillows, I would probably cut this one at maybe 29 inches, and then it would have left my cuff a little shorter, but the body of my pillowcase would have been a little longer. So those are all things you can do to adjust to the pillows that you have in your house. So we do have a pattern for this. Just called pillowcases. It gives you the instruction for cutting your fabric, for how to fold it differently if you have a directional fabric. And then it gives you how to lay out for both methods, whether it's the regular pillowcase or the hot dog pillowcase. All right, I think that's all we have for today.
That'll be on the website later
Yep,
tonight.
Elaine's going to get this on the website later tonight, so you'll be able to purchase it, or she'll also have it as a downloadable, and you can have it in your house instantaneously. All right, we hope everybody has a great week, and we will see you soon. Bye.